the second year here, and he's the founder of GooseWatch. He's the editor of SALDF. And then we have Ken, who's making his way to the stage. He's an aviation expert and veteran with more than 25 years in the field. He's a pilot and president of Friends of the Guardia Airport, which is a nonprofit organization which fosters safety, commerce, efficient airport and airspace operations at the Guardia and the surrounding metropolitan area. Ken is a former lead safety representative for the FAA safety team, and currently heads up the AV team, which is a New York City-based aviation consulting firm. And next we have Hoffman. She's currently an adjunct professor here, and she teaches animal law. She's previously worked on as a staff attorney at the Animal Legal Defense Fund, and she will discuss some of the opportunities available to students, attorneys, or anyone interested in using or pursuing law to help animals. And one more thing, we'd like to thank the Environmental Society for helping co-sponsor this. And take it away, David.
Okay, well, thank you, Jenny. Thank you all for being here, and to our panelists, and thank you for the opportunity to let you see some of the work that I've been doing outside of this building and inside the building sometimes. Thank you for letting me talk to you about urban wildlife in New York City. That is the issue that I've been working on. So what are we talking about here? Urban wildlife in New York City. The issues and the conversations that we're going to have are not unique or specific to New York City. They're happening all across the country and internationally, really anywhere that there's animals and people living in close proximity to each other. Rural, suburban, urban. So here you can see we have Canada geese in New York City, which I'll be talking a lot about. Wild turkeys on Staten Island. That's a coyote that somebody took a picture of in Long Island City. Actually, we have hundreds, if not thousands, of different species that call New York City home, either because they live here year-round or they're passing over on migration. And New York City is my area of expertise. I was born and raised here. So we have 7,000 square miles of real estate, about 14% of which is identified as park space, green space, and some percentage of this total which is habitable for wildlife. And from an animal rights perspective, the idea that I'd like for you to have in mind as we go forward, when we have 8 to 9 million people living within these borders, and conflict is inevitable between people, and we tend to frown on resolving those problems by killing each other, morally and legally. And the same is not necessarily the case, or usually the case, with animals. We have a tendency to kill the animals that get in our way, and that is why I started doing this work. And I'm going to talk to you mostly about the work that we've been doing for our organization with GooseWatch over the past couple of years. I will talk a little bit about the law as it fails to protect animals. And then I'll pass it over to our aviation expert who will be on hand to answer any questions that come up. And Professor Hoffman, who will speak about some of the opportunities that you might be interested in pursuing to protect animals using the law. So how did I get involved in this? Canada geese in New York City. This was before I got involved. I did not know any of this was happening 4 years ago. In fact, everything I'm about to talk to you about is relatively new to me. In 2009, as you may be aware, there was an event called Miracle on the Hudson. Captain Sullenberger heroically landed a jet airliner in the Hudson River after a collision with migrating Canada geese. And that really was the impetus for the program that we have now, which is for the removal of Canada geese in parts of New York City. And after that happened, the common complaints that people have about Canada geese combined with this incident provided enough public support for this program to move forward. People were more than happy to see geese targeted, some people. And there was an aggressive media campaign. If you go back to the articles during this period of time, you will see a lot of one-sidedness. People are basically our government agencies putting forth the reasons why this program is necessary and not much opposition. So that's why we got involved. This is when I got involved, or the beginning of when I got involved. In 2010, a big story was about the roundup of 368 canyon geese in Prospect Park. That's in the neighborhood where I grew up in. Spent a lot of time in Prospect Park. So after this roundup, it became a big news story, and a lot of animal activists, as well as my neighbors and community members, were really perplexed by this. They wanted to know why this was happening and who made the decision and how it could be prevented from happening again. And we didn't know a lot, and this is what we were told. The USDA said that this was necessary to protect aviation safety. It was humane, it was euthanasia, and we felt in our gut that this was inaccurate. So that's what really catapulted us to get involved. And we spent many months, our community, trying to figure out how we could prevent a repeat happening of these roundups in Prospect Park specifically and in general. So the immediate response, and I basically sat in the back row taking notes for the first 9 months after that incident. There were a lot of local advocates during this period of time who organized rallies, protests, and all kinds of events, and tried to call attention to the issue and try to put it forward into the public dialogue. And also during this period of time, specifically in Prospect Park, they instituted a wildlife management task force. And the goal was to try to prevent the USDA from coming back to Prospect Park specifically. They began oiling eggs, using water collies to scare geese out of Prospect Park, because during this period of time after that first summer, our understanding was that the USDA could come back to Prospect Park to round up geese if there were too many. And we didn't know what that magic number was, but we knew that it was maybe somewhere around 20. And after the roundup happened, there were the entire population was wiped out, and within weeks there were hundreds of geese back in Prospect Park, and because they fly around. And by the next spring, which is where I came into the picture, there were 36 geese about. It was between 30 and 50 in Prospect Park. And that's when I stepped in, because after months of trying to find out whether or not there was going to be a roundup in Prospect Park a second summer, I sent an email out to all of these people and said that I did not want to be asleep in my bed. If the USDA was going to come back to Prospect Park, I wanted to be there with a camera, at the very least, so that we could document what our government was doing in our parks, and let people decide for themselves whether or not this was a program that they supported. And also, it became a big news story because there were baby goslings. Even despite the egg oiling, there were baby geese in Prospect Park. So it became a very big, interesting story, even though it was never my intention. I was actually scared that if it got out what we were trying to do, that they would work around us in some way. And so we spent 6 weeks that summer, every single morning and night at the park, and we took shifts, and we waited, and they never came. That summer we won. They announced that they were not coming back to Prospect Park. And we felt that it was because of us, because they did not want to be caught on camera. They did not want the public knowing what it looked like. But there were other theories, as I mentioned, that they had implemented management techniques. And there was also the idea that they never should have come to Prospect Park in the first place. The FAA established first a 5-mile radius for Canada geese and many other birds, and Ken will talk about this. And for geese, that was extended to 7 miles. And Prospect Park, by all accounts, is outside of that 7-mile radius. So there was a lot of doubt as to why they didn't come back to Prospect Park. So the next step after that was to spread out. There were roundups happening in parks all across the city, just not Prospect Park that summer. So we spent the next several months scouting parks out across the city. And by the next spring, we had identified 15 parks that we wanted to try to duplicate our efforts in and see if that worked. And we looked for parks that were near where people lived so that we could try to talk to them. We canvassed parks, and some of the people in this room helped out with that, and tried to recruit people into our efforts, and that was very successful. And people had the smart idea of putting chalk down on the pavement, and I got a lot of phone calls. And we did tabling at events, and that's how we initially got this out. And so that summer, we were able to prevent the roundups from happening in 13 out of 15 of those parks. And the one park that they did round up, we ended up being in actually only 12 of those parks. We parks that we weren't covering was one of the roundup sites. But we had one giant blind spot, and we should have been ready for it. There was a roundup that summer at Jamaica Bay Wildlife Refuge, which you can see is in close proximity to JFK Airport. And I called the National Park Service, which manages that park, and protested, and in the course of my conversation asked them whether or not they had taken any pictures, and to my surprise they said yes. And they provided the pictures to me, and this was the first time that I was ever able to get my hands on 300 pictures of what that looked like. And we got these pictures out into the media. It was on the cover of Metro New York. We protested outside the offices of Senator Gillibrand, who was the one who proposed allowing the roundup to take place at Jamaica Bay Wildlife Refuge. I was interviewed by Jane Ballard Mitchell on her show. But we, after a second summer of spending every night and day at 15 parks across the city, still had no video and weren't a witness to any of these roundups. And I'm going to fast forward one more year because we did this for a third summer. I didn't even want to do it, but a lot of other people did. And so last summer, on July 2nd, as I was in a suit on my way to my internship, I got a phone call from one of our volunteers that the USDA was at Jamaica Bay Wildlife Refuge. And I got into my girlfriend's car and I went out there. And I was with one or two other people because I got an alert out to all of our membership. And as many people as could got to Jamaica Bay Wildlife Refuge to help document this roundup. And actually, I received several calls that summer. So by the third summer, we were in a much better position to try to document, at least document what was happening. And so I'll show you the video now. It's 2 minutes. That was 3 years in the making. And you can hear the chirping babies. Very sad. But we got that video out into the press. The New York Times had it on their website for a couple of days. I think it's still there. Gotham has covered it. So this has been very helpful to try to get the message out about what's happening. Can you go to the top? So I'm going to just switch over and talk about some of the other work that we've done in the meantime, because this hasn't been the only thing that we've been working on. I got involved in the roundup of turkeys in Staten Island. This was a roundup that took place over the summer, and again, we didn't know that this was happening until it had happened already. We have some of the turkeys relocated after that roundup to Catskill Animal Sanctuary. We were able to foil for the contracts. We found out that it cost $16,000 essentially to round up about 120 turkeys, and we were also able the USDA came back a second time to round up about 2 or 3 dozen turkeys, and we had volunteers who were able to get some of the photos of that. And we're still trying to resolve the issue. There are dozens and dozens of turkeys running around on the south shore of Staten Island still. The contract has expired. If they want to kill more, they're going to have to spend more taxpayer money. So we're hoping to be able to find some way of resolving that issue. And this was the most recent thing we've been involved in, the DEC proposal to list mute swans as an invasive species and wipe them out from the state of New York. And we launched a petition that got 25,000 signatures. We got a lot of press in the past couple of weeks. And temporarily, we got a reprieve. The DEC said that they received so many comments that they're going to go back to the drawing board and revise their plan. So we have to wait and see what their new plan looks like.
Is there a question period?
Yeah, at the end, I should have said, we'll have some time at the end for questions. So one of the things that we advocate for is tolerance and coexistence with wildlife, and we try to find ways of balancing these and resolving the issues that come up without having to kill these animals. And there's a lot of different organizations that have different ideas about how to do this, and there's a lot of ways as long as there's a will to do it. And generally speaking, broadly speaking, I'd like to advocate for, city designing and urban planning in such a way that we are, able to coexist, and that land use is friendly to wildlife that's here. So I'm just going to go over some of the laws briefly that essentially fail to protect these animals, I'm learning about this myself, as you know. So in about a month at the New York City Bar Association, there's going to be a panel that will go into much more depth on this if you're interested. The Migratory Bird Treaty Act protects Canada geese, but provides for some pretty broad exemptions. The Animal Damage Control Act gives statutory authority to the USDA, Wildlife Services, which is a subdivision, to kill whatever animals they deem necessary in any way they deem necessary. And NEPA requires environmental impact statements. So that's one angle that some have taken to try to stop the USDA in their tracks. The Endangered Species Act does not protect Canada geese or most of the animals that we're advocating for. So, as I mentioned, Canada geese are listed under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, but right at the bottom here you'll see that there are 3 categories of exemptions that Fish and Wildlife Services will grant permits for, either because they're a nuisance, because they are causing property damage, or because they pose a threat to public health or safety. And if you are a property owner, you can apply for a permit, and if you argue that the animals on your property are falling under one of these 3 categories, you'll generally get a permit to have them removed. And that's a decision that's between the property owner or municipality, in this case the City of New York, and USDA Wildlife Services. And generally, the public is not included in those conversations. That's one of the things that we're trying to change. And the Animal Damage Control Act, which gives USDA authority to enter into these contracts and to perform these wildlife managements. This is an article by Camille Fox. She runs Project Coyote, which is out west. She talks about how USDA Wildlife Services essentially operates at the behest of industry, mostly ranchers and sport hunters, because predators go after sheep and cattle and game that hunters want to kill. So they have targeted predators out west. They get their funding in 2 places. One is through the federal government from the federal budget, and the other is by contracting with private landowners and municipalities. And taxpayers are spending, through FOIL requests, we know $120 million a year for USDA Wildlife Services to do this work. And advocates for animals have argued not only is this cruel, but it's not effective. It doesn't actually accomplish the goals that are used to justify these programs. And And another important point is, outside of the people that I know, most people don't know that this is happening. Most people don't know that USDA Wildlife Services has this kind of arrangement, and that's one of the other things that we're trying to change. So now I'm going to start to switch over to aviation safety, and by way of introduction, I can talk about how in New York City the permits were granted because Canada geese are, supposed to be a threat to aviation safety. And USDA Wildlife Services has an MOA with the FAA. And so they were able to get permits and contracts. And as you can see, the Port Authority is spending $1.7 million a year on wildlife management at their airports. The City of New York has already spent about $250,000 on this program. There was an incident in December that made the news because they had killed a couple of snowy owls that flew into the region. That was reversed pretty quickly after an outcry, and they switched to trapping and releasing the owls. But it was just in the paper last week that 20,000 animals at New York City airports were killed in aviation safety. The list is very long and includes endangered and protected species. So here's the big question. I think most people, after the miracle on the Hudson, felt that, yes, it was bad to kill geese, but if it was necessary to protect people, then it should be done. And we're going to ask the question, is this necessary? Is it effective? And there are some people who disagree, that this is maybe not the best approach. These are some colleagues of Ken's, Ron Merritt and Jim Paul, who are aviation experts as well. You can see that they say that these are not necessarily the most effective or should not be taken first before other methods are pursued. And Captain Sullenberger has said that what happened to him could happen again tomorrow. So essentially, the 5 or so years that New York City has been removing Canada geese from our parks has accomplished nothing, perhaps. And there may be very strong alternatives that we aren't using. Radar technology has been implemented at other airports and in other countries. Israel has reduced their bird strikes by a very large percentage by implementing radar technology and mapping out the migration paths of birds. We don't have radar technology at our New York City airports, or most commercial airports in America. They have them at military airports. And how I came to get to know Ken is through his advocacy to stop the construction of the waste transfer station that they're planning on building at the end of a runway at LaGuardia Airport. As you can see, it's very close. Waste transfer stations are one of the types of sites that the FAA says on paper that they don't want near airports because they can attract birds. And in fact, we know that this may be a threat because we have a contract between USDA Wildlife Services and that specific station for $700,000 a year. It's not even finished being built yet. And it's going to cost a lot of money to mitigate the threat of birds, and it may or may not be effective. This is a photo I took from City Field. You can see that they're very close to each other. So that's my presentation in a nutshell. I would like to continue my advocacy on this and try to find ways that we can scale back these programs here in New York City and elsewhere. We'll turn it over to Ken.
Thank you, David. David and I have been collaborating on trying to protect wildlife, especially with respect to its impact on aviation at the Guardia Airport and the New York City area. It's very clear that, and you don't have to be rocket scientists to understand that birds and airplanes just don't mix. However, there's no reason, and the data does not support that killing these animals will make the skies any safer. What happens is, if we can go, is there a way to go back?
Sure.
To the satellite view? Okay, that's great. So you could see where the star is on the bottom right-hand corner. That's where they're building the North Shore Marine Transfer Station. And that's directly across from the approach end of runway 31 at the Guardia Airport. Now, what happens is that these planes are going to be flying just a couple of hundred feet above that transfer station, where every single day 3,000 tons of solid waste will be deposited to go on the barges, which will go off to wherever it is that the city sends it to. But just imagine being on a beach, which I'm sure all of you have in one time or another, and you take a potato chip and just throw it up in the air, and you know the amount of birds that is going to attract, especially seagulls. And imagine now 3,000 tons of food and all kinds of putrescent waste that the city of New York is going to dump on the approach end of the primary runway of the Guardia Airport is going to create a tremendous hazard. And why that's a problem is that this is going to be a bird magnet. And so the city of New York is knowingly building a facility that's a hazard to aviation and then trying to mitigate it after the fact. And our policy and our position is that you shouldn't build something that's a hazard to aviation and then try to go back and mitigate it afterwards. Because there's just no way to do that. You'll never be able to control the sights and smells of 3,000 tons of food every single day in that area, especially in the summertime, when, it starts to smell. And you know how the trucks that collect trash from the homes, they have the trash hanging out the back, and the birds follow these trucks. So what's going to happen is the aircraft are going to be landing on that runway, and there's going to be lots of birds there. So we've got to do something about it. So one of the ways that you mitigate birds is by using pyrotechnics, and it's been pretty successful. The problem is that because this facility is on the approach end of the runway, if you use pyrotechnics and scatter the birds using sound and light, they'll just fly up into the air right into the path of the oncoming airplanes. So because of its proximity to the airport, to the approach end of the airport, you can't do that there. So the only thing that you can really do to mitigate at this point is to slaughter them. And that's really what's left. They're just building and attracted to all these birds. And so what our organization has done is we've filed several lawsuits. We've been doing this for many, many years, and we've been trying to protect wildlife and other animals around the country from trying to be harmed as a result of being close to airports. So what the FAA has is they have guidelines, and these guidelines say how far places, facilities that attract animals and attract birds have to be from an airport. However, the FAA in this particular case is turning a blind eye, and they're failing to provide the necessary oversight to the city of New York in terms of making sure that it's outside the necessary limits, which is 5 miles, and they're just allowing the city of New York to build it. Now, we filed lawsuits to try and stop them, which is very difficult because the law doesn't allow for citizen suits against the FAA. So therefore, we have to file administrative actions within the FAA, and then we can appeal that to the circuit court level, to the federal appellate level, which is what we've done. We've been in the Second Circuit Court of Appeals on this. And the basis for those lawsuits is just that it's either illegal or it's arbitrary and capricious. And those are extremely high standards by which to prevail. The other problem is that because you're getting into the courts on the appellate level, the court relies on the administrative record. So therefore, it's almost impossible to get any kind of discovery. A lot of what we could do to protect these birds and to protect aircraft in the airspace is to bring out the facts and the information that the FAA has with respect to these type of issues, and then use that in public relations effort. And those type of things work, but we can't get our hands on them, and we can't depose anybody. the experts who did the analysis on this facility had come out in advance of being part of that panel that did the analysis, opposing the transfer station. And then once they got hired by the FAA and the USDA to do that study, the scope of the study didn't include, they were not allowed to comment as to whether or not the facility should be built or not, only whether it could be mitigated or not. You didn't have to mitigate anything. But certainly we're going to attract thousands and thousands of more birds to that area, creating a greater hazard, and then they're going to have to slaughter them. And we're still working. We have several lawsuits out there now that are still pending, both on the trial level and in federal court, and local district court, and also at the appellate level. And we hope that we'll prevail and we'll be able to do something about this and stop this from happening. We're not opposed to having a transfer station. We're not opposed to the solid waste management plan that the city has passed. What we're opposed to is the siting of these facilities, and that they shouldn't be within the 5-mile parameter of any airport. And by the way, just so you know, there are other places we can build this. The East 91st Street Marine Transfer Station is the city's planning to build on the Upper East Side. That's also within the 5-mile radius of the Guardia Airport. And they're building it there as opposed to building it on the west side where there's an existing transfer station that's been abandoned. And they could have put it back there, and that would have been more safe. The problem was at the time when they were going through the approval process, that the Gansevoort transfer station was in Christine Quinn's district, and she was the speaker of the New York City, the city council. Yeah, so she had a lot of power, and she didn't want garbage in her district, and so they put it near the airport, and they co-located it with Asphalt Green, which is a large park where children of the community play every day. So that was really a bad choice. Anyway, so that's where we are right now. And afterwards, I'm willing to take any questions if anybody has any.
Thank you so much, Ken. So, as you can see, so on the one hand, the city is saying that we can target geese within 7 miles of any airport, but on the other hand, this is allowed. And just keep in mind also that the Miracle on the Hudson, which took place in 2009, occurred after the SWMP, the Solid Waste Management Plan, of which this facility is part of, which was passed by the City Council back in 2006. So there certainly are some questions about how to address these issues. Thank you so much, Ken.
My pleasure.
We'll pass it along to Piper, and then after we'll come to questions.
Hi. The activist in me can't help but point out one thing. When organizations like Ken's do try to challenge agency decisions, the administrative record he mentioned is the basis that they use for deciding who wins. You can contribute to that administrative record. Whenever you see anything about notice and comment, that an agency has opened an issue for notice and comment, submit a comment. The more the better, the more detailed the better, because a judge may be looking at that sometime. And if there is a comment in there with this information, the judge will conclude the agency knew this information. And if they ignored it, perhaps their decision was arbitrary. So all I'm saying is comment. So what I'm actually here for is to talk about what career paths there are for lawyers who are interested in helping animals. And I came up with a few. It's really limited only by your imagination, but I came up with some of the best known and the ones that I'm most familiar with. So the first one, and I think the most obvious, is nonprofits, where everyone's familiar with PETA, for example, the Animal Legal Defense Fund. These are organizations that employ lawyers to bring cases on behalf of animals, sometimes to lobby, sometimes to work on referendums in individual states, a whole bunch of different ways of using the law to help animals. One drawback for those of you who are law students is that the nonprofit groups generally don't hire straight out of law school. So one example is right now the Animal Legal Defense Fund is looking for a staff litigator, but that person has to have at least 3 years of litigation experience. So you can pretty much rely on having to get experience somewhere else before you go to an agency like that. In my case, I did a clerkship and then went to ALDF. So a clerkship is a good idea for many reasons, one of which is it'll count as experience when these organizations are looking at you. Just to give you some idea of what we're talking about here, that particular position at ALDF that's advertising right now pays $55,000 a year. Just to give you a price point. There are as I said, a number of organizations that do this. They have different priorities, different philosophies, different approaches. The Humane Society of the U.S., I think right now might have the biggest sort of internal just law office going. They're doing a whole lot of work all over the country, and I would absolutely take a look at them if you don't have a problem with DC. Definitely look at the Humane Society. PETA does a lot of fantastic work as well. And a lot of these groups partner with each other. So generally, whichever one you're working at, you'll have some cooperation and exposure to the other groups. The next venue is to work as sort of corporate counsel or in-house counsel for one of these organizations. For example, you could work at the ASPCA, and you would be handling employment disputes, contracts, compliance with regulations, that kind of thing. So if you are concerned with doing animal law in particular, you just want to help out, those are great jobs. And they're varied jobs. They involve a lot of different kinds of law. A third possibility is a private public interest firm. The idea there is you have a private law firm, but it has a public interest mission. And I worked at one for 7 years. It could be a great model. They generally pay less than big firms, but more than nonprofits. And they can bring a wealth of experience to these kinds of cases. Nonprofits often partner with them. The best known in the field of animal law and environmental law is probably Meyer and Glitzenstein, which again is in DC. And they've been doing this kind of work for a very long time now, with a fair amount of success. The fourth career path is government. And you might have noticed, if you've looked into animal law much, that the government pretty much gets in the way, no matter what the issue is. We talked about the USDA, we talked about the FAA, we talked about a bunch of different offices that are generally doing the wrong thing. So there are actually 3 benefits for an animal advocate to go work for these people. First one is it's great experience. Generally, when you're working for the government, you will get top-notch litigation experience, advocacy experience, generally administrative law experience, depending which office you're in. Partly your experience will be great because you will have a lot of work to do. They tend to be understaffed. Another reason it's great experience is that the supervisors there often have been there a very long time and have a lot of experience. A second benefit is that you will get an invaluable insider view of what's going on in these agencies. So what motivates them? Who is influencing their decisions? What kind of arguments persuade them and what don't? You also, a third benefit is while you're on the inside, you'll have an opportunity to influence their decisions. And that opportunity will probably increase the longer you're there. But you'll be in there and you'll have a bite at the apple that's much bigger than what any member of the public would have. So number 5 is the private sector. And there are actually a surprising number of people who have full-time jobs at big private law firms and do animal law on the side and manage to have a really large impact and build high profiles and make a great contribution on the side. People write law review articles, people teach, people even if you are starting out there, and you're right off animal law, if you're interested in it, one thing to look at when you're considering joining a firm is their pro bono program. The first question is, does the firm have a pro bono program, and how good is it? For example, at a lot of firms, they will count your pro bono hours towards your billable minimum. A lot of other firms won't. It's a good thing to know. Some firms are already doing pro bono law with animal groups. Some firms aren't. Find out whether they would be willing to do that. You will benefit. You will make more money than at the other jobs. A minus is that you're going to be spending a lot of time between your actual paid work and this other work. But it can be done. It has been done. It is being done by some people who are making great contributions. And 6 is teaching. Law school professors write law review articles. They teach the next generation of lawyers, so they have the opportunity to promote animal-friendly legal developments. Not as directly or as quickly as someone who is in court or advocating for legislation, but nonetheless they can have an influence. And I'm sure there's a lot more I haven't even thought of yet.
Thank you, Professor Hoffman.
So, you brought up some really great points, and I got to tell you that having brought probably somewhere around 40, 45 lawsuits, working with various law firms throughout the country, there is definitely a vacuum and a need for lawyers who have a background in animal law. There's no question about that. You have to have the right niche. So most people who have that type of background, what I found is together with environmental law, which you mentioned, but another area would be land use. So someone who's interested in specializing in land use and animal rights law, I think that there would be a lot of demand for that. I know I would hire one. So,
That makes a lot of sense.
yeah. So that's what I wanted to add.
Well, thank you both so much, and I guess it's time to take questions. If anybody has any. Yes.
My name is Richard Grohl. I'm an advocate for Joralemon, Illinois. This is not the question I came here with, but it really is very simple with
Hoffman.
Mr. Hoffman, we're talking about. Isn't there a huge risk that when people who have a certain spiritual and basic bedrock kind of thinking, for instance, about animal rights and the environment, etc., when they get into the actual field, and they work for the government, or they form their firm, or whatever, this is what I've seen, don't they get co-opted first by the mentality, second by the money, third by the culture, and isn't it really, really kind of almost a fallacy to think that unless you really define yourself and your work and your mission and everything you do, you're really going to fall into a huge number of traps. You're not going to be that kind of an advocate that you planned to be when you were a youngster. If you even touch that third rail, kind of the market, a lot of these environmental firms, yes, they want to do the good work, but they go work for the land, the developers, and they go work for the county, and by doing all that, that's where all their funds are, that's where the money is, that's where they're sending their kids to school. They develop that mindset. I just don't see that all these ideals survive going through. It's
Sure.
sort of a bigger conflict. Can society really have these ideals and also make money and have careers and go on vacation to the Caribbean?
Yeah, I think I understand your question, and I think the answer lies in something that you said. You said unless they're really committed to these ideals.
I said unless they just do it, they define their life and themselves as doing that one thing, as opposed to doing all these other things.
So that's the answer. Some people will be influenced, some people won't. I don't think you can say that this is such an infallible juggernaut that anybody who steps foot into the government is going to be brainwashed. That doesn't sound realistic either. I think it depends on the person, it depends on the environment and their own circumstances. Obviously, the people that I know in the animal movement have not been co-opted.
Yeah, and I could just add that on the federal level, the DOJ represents the FAA in litigation, and none of those attorneys are animal rights specialists or just general attorneys. So it doesn't matter most of the time what the area is, they just, they just follow the law. Pretty much the deck is pretty much stacked simply because agencies have a right to make mistakes. Agencies can, the court gives agencies deference because, they're responsible for administrating whatever it is, whatever department that they have, such as aviation, the FAA with aviation, and they can interpret their own rules and regulations the way they say. One perfect example of that is that one of the lawsuits that we had said that was based upon a law that says that the owner of an airport can't do certain things. We said that, the city of New York can't do that thing. And the DOJ came back and said, well, the city doesn't own the Guardia Airport. So we went to court, we had the title to the land, we had the lease contracts, we had everything. And the court ruled that, well, for the purpose of this particular issue, because the FAA says that they interpreted so the city does not own the Guardia Airport under this particular circumstance. So, what can you do under those circumstances? So it becomes very, very difficult.
But it's huge risk, isn't it? When you tell students, they can go in these different directions, isn't there, would you acknowledge that empirically, and judging by it does, by what we might deal with the land use law, so I've dealt with some of those attorneys. Wouldn't you agree that when you're telling students you don't really know as much about the world as maybe someone 30 years down the line in their career will, that they can achieve their ideals by joining the system in exactly the way, isn't there a big risk that in many cases that doesn't really work out?
No, I don't think there's a big risk. There's a risk. It happens. I've seen it happen. I've more often seen it not happen. And frankly, most law students are going to go to big firms no matter what I say. To give them the idea that perhaps they can hold on to their ideals and do some good, I think is nothing but useful.
We only have a couple more minutes, so I'll take a couple of questions.
Two questions very briefly. New York Times and the Post both said that the DEC said they were going to kill every single egg. The press release that came out from the DEC didn't seem to say that at all to me. It said killing each different community with the swans, and it didn't talk about killing every single baby. What the heck is with the newspapers?
Well, in my couple of years of dealing with the press, they're not always right. If you saw the press release from the DEC, it said that they're going to issue a revision. Whether or not that revision is a change to their overall goal of eradicating the meat swamp population in New York, or if it's going to be a shuffling with the deck in that sense, or just a revision of how they're going to, or just going back to the drawing board in general and changing that goal, remains to be seen. We'll have to wait and see what the DEC comes out with.
Is the Bosnia different than Bloomberg as far as this way station? And his people to talk to as opposed to Bloomberg's people?
Well, the current mayor was in the city council at the time that this whole thing came up for a vote. The city council was not given all the material information necessary to be able to make an informed decision when they voted. For example, the FAA had issued what's called a determination of presumed hazard on the transfer station, which was in existence at the time that the vote was taken by the city council. So, but the city council wasn't aware of that, nor were they given the information when they made that decision. I think we have a new mayor, I think we have a new sheriff in town, and I think that so far he's proven himself to be a defender and a champion for animal rights, and I think that he's going to take another look at this. I don't think it's going to happen tomorrow, but there's a lot of people such as myself, who are going to be working with the mayor's office to try and turn them around on this issue. And I would say, by the way, that technically, if you slaughter birds, it's not a solution, because what happens is that the slaughtering of those birds creates a vacuum and other birds replace them. So that's why, it doesn't work. The only thing that really works is to make the geography uninviting to birds, so they don't want to come there and they don't want to have babies there. That's really the only thing that works.
What about auditory deterrence? Loud recordings like hooting owls. They frequently use those on like supermarkets and stuff.
Yeah, pyrotechnics. Earlier I mentioned that's one of the deterrents and mitigating procedures that's used. However, in this particular case of LaGuardia Airport, it creates a greater hazard because the location of the transfer station or the magnet that's attracting all these birds is literally directly underneath the path of the arriving aircraft, and they would be
The birds would be desensitized to aircraft sound anyway. What's the difference?
right. And with technology, airplanes are quieter and they're faster, and so they don't, makes it more of a hazard.
Cody, did you have a question?
Yeah, this is sort of getting into minutia, but I was just curious for Mr. Paskar. You mentioned something about APA litigation limits on discovery, and I was just hoping to unpack that a little bit. That's basically because the record is the judge is confined to looking at the record of what the agency considered. Is that correct?
Well, first of all, I'm not a lawyer, but that's my understanding, that they're limited to what's in the administrative record. And I agree with the professor that if you see something, you should definitely add to that administrative record by responding to public requests for comments. One of the other things that it does is it gives you standing in the event at some point you do want to bring a lawsuit.
And is that affected at all depending on what prong you sued under the APA, whether it's arbitrary, capricious, or contrary to law, or one of the other provisions, or is that the same?
No, I think that's about it. Yeah. The administrative record is it. The more that you can get into that administrative record, the better. So I would say that when you make a public response, that you include all relevant documents and supporting information, so that those things also become part of the administrative record.
I think that's about all the time that we have. Our speakers will be around afterwards if you want to ask more questions. Thank you again for coming on. Thank you to SALDF and to the environmental officer. And to our speakers. Thank you all for coming.